My process usually has an ugly phase right at the start. You can see I'm blocking out some local colors here. I think it's generally recommended to start with the overall lighting situation rather than the local colors, and I might try this next time, but I'll admit my grasp on light is not quite there yet, so I don't feel very confident in my ability to do that. So here you can see I'm rendering out the lips specifically. I think this goes against the more generally advised strategy of working from big to small. However, at this stage of the painting, I was actually quite demotivated with it to continue. As you can see, it doesn't look very nice, so I started hyper-focusing on just a small area that was interesting to me. This is actually something I learned from Steven Zapata. So he says that by fully rendering out just a small part of your piece and making it look finished, seeing the small polished area can actually motivate you to go and finish the whole piece. So you can see I've imported a photo of just some celebrity here. This gives me a reference both for the specific features on the face as well as a handy way for me to color pick. I'm not the best at managing color palettes. I typically just keep opening the color wheel and just grabbing whatever color is roughly in the right area of brightness and saturation that I need. Often I'll get it wrong by quite a large margin and need to keep reopening the wheel and revising. So I find that sometimes color picking from an existing image is just a nice shortcut for that. Here I'm starting to refine some of the larger shapes and colors to begin revealing a little bit of the form. At this stage, I still wasn't sure about the lighting situation I wanted, so I'm just kind of playing around to see what looks nice. I think this refinement is kind of a bit of a continuation from the whole lips thing. I'm trying to get the picture to a point where it's compelling enough for me that I can start imagining this as a real three-dimensional form in my head. Finally, at this stage, I start adding some overall lighting, well, really just colors. I'm not really proceeding thoughtfully or analytically, just kind of plopping down some big color drops, mostly just to give myself some ideas. I would say this is the point where the picture starts to leave the ugly phase for me and starts to more resemble the final product. This is also when the process starts becoming fun. My favorite part of the process is to stare at what I've currently got, identify a problem area, go in and resolve it, and then iterate this over and over until there's no longer anything that I really dislike in the piece. That part also happens to take the longest, so I guess I'm lucky in that I get to spend the majority of the time on the part that I like. However, it also means that any major structural issues are harder and more annoying to fix later. I think I do need to invest a bit more time into studying things like light, composition, anatomy, so that these problems are fixed earlier in the first 10% of the process. At this stage, I'm still mostly just playing around with color. Since the hair and the clothing are components over which I probably have the greatest liberty of color choices, I wanted the picture to get to a place where I myself would look at it and find the color shifts very pleasing to look at. Actually, purple happens to be my least favorite color. For some reason, I just don't find it very pleasant to look at. But I do like purple when it's a bridge between like pink and magenta with blue. And I also really like seeing it next to teal. Throughout the painting, I really struggled with this neckline and collarbone area. I probably wouldn't have struggled so much if I had actually constructed the anatomy beforehand, but oh well. You can see some of the struggle beginning here. I actually added the gold ring to the choker in order to divert some attention away from it, or maybe just distract myself from it. But it was a good opportunity to sneak in a specular highlight, which I really like. In fact, I probably went just slightly too far with it towards the end, adding specular highlights to strands of hair in random places, rather than at a single focal point. That would have made more sense for the light. To quickly go over my tools, I'm using Procreate on an iPad Pro with the Gen 1 Apple Pencil. I'm just using a single brush for the whole piece, which is the round brush with tapering. This is mostly out of laziness and also just a lack of experience with brushes. If I were to try using some of the other brushes, it would purely be for just experimentation, as I really wouldn't know what I'm doing or what I'm trying to do with it. I use the smudge tool quite a fair bit. If I was more savvy, I might try to configure the brush to automatically vary the color temperature across the stroke, as I really, really like the effect of shifting temperature colors just everywhere. But for now, I just do it the naive way by hand-picking the colors. Another tool that I use a lot, and I think I really overuse this, is the liquify tool. I'm not sure what it's called in other programs. It's basically the one that allows you to push and pull bits of the picture around like it's rubber sheet geometry. I think it's a really useful tool, especially for someone at my current level where I feel like I've developed the skill to identify that some aspect is off with the proportion or the alignment, but I lack the ability or maybe the patience to address those things at the start. But I don't really like the experience of over-relying on this tool. Part of this comes from that common feeling that we all kind of have that somehow it's cheating, even though I don't really think it's cheating, but part of it is also just that it doesn't feel quite as enjoyable to work that way than it is in traditional, where you're laying out everything stroke by stroke, and then correcting something would involve removing the material also stroke by stroke, sometimes damaging the surface a little bit in the process, and then redoing it stroke by stroke. I find that this is a much more meditative way to work, and, sometimes maybe the effort required to correct something is just too great, and I'll just leave it. And maybe it even later becomes like a really charming aspect of the piece. I think that the experience of making these kinds of trade-offs is also one of the more enjoyable aspects of making art. With the digital medium where everything is easy, or at least people expect that everything should be easy, these trade-offs kind of disappear because the decision is almost always to fix it. Even when you finish a piece, or, well, what is it that they say? Art is never finished, it's just abandoned. Even when you abandon a piece, there are always so many more problems that you could still fix because these fixes should be easy. And so I always feel like with digital, even at the end, like the piece still feels very unsettled, and like maybe I didn't do the best that I could have done with it. Whereas with, say, a pencil drawing, I can only really push something so far before the reward of continuing to work more on it is outweighed by the effort, or possibly even the state of the paper. So at that point, I can confidently call it done. At moments in this replay, you might notice sometimes there's like bits of the picture that flash. What that is me turning on and off layers to compare before and after. So I typically paint in just one layer, but at certain points when I feel I'm happy with the progression of the picture, I'll copy the entire canvas into a new layer, and then I compare the different layers to assess whether something I just added is an improvement or not. Since for this I'm not copying from a reference, the only tangible reference I have is the previous version of the same picture. And more often than I'd like to admit, I'll find that whatever it is I just spent the last 20 minutes doing is not actually an improvement, and I'll revert to a previous version. I'm not too worried about this. I think this is just something that I'll get better at with time and experience. Now I'm starting to resolve the eye a little bit. I find it really interesting looking at other people's portraits and seeing how they articulate different facial features and what they focus on. I know a lot of people focus on the eyes. It's commonly held to be the most important part of the face. For me, though, I don't find eyes particularly beautiful or interesting or worthy of focus. For me, noses and lips always feel much more interesting and beautiful. I'm not sure why. Possibly it's because noses and lips are like fleshy. Okay, well that sounded a bit perverted, but what I meant is that because they're less complex in terms of their material, they're pretty much just skin, they've got stuff like form and subsurface scattering, and these are things that interest me. Eyes, on the other hand, there's just like so much going on. There's like all these really small scale skin folds and protrusions and slimy membranes and hair and this lens thing. Like, I don't know, it feels a bit like painting some kind of alien creature. One artist I used to like a lot, well, I still do, Huang Guangjian. Sorry if I got the tones wrong there. I don't read Chinese. I was watching one of his painting streams once, and he mentioned that he likes to leave the eyes a little bit blurry, a little bit hazy, and just not fully resolved, because that way it looks more mysterious. And I really gravitated to that idea. I also really like the idea of having one eye a bit less resolved than the other. I think it strengthens like a focal point, and it also just means you don't have to work as hard on the second eye. As you can see here, I've also made a convenient choice not to have to work as hard on the second eye by covering it up. I did try to resolve the right eye to the best of my ability, even though at the end I still wasn't fully happy with the result. All that stuff I said about not really liking eyes and how they're slimy aliens or whatever, I wonder if that's actually just that I'm not very good at drawing them. I find eyelashes particularly hard. Like, I feel like I can never get the relative directions of the lashes to look believable, and I have to use a lot of the liquify tool to correct it. Earlier I mentioned subsurface scattering. It's not something I know a whole lot about, but it's something I really like looking at, especially when it's pushed to a point where it's not even entirely realistic. I find that I really like skin that almost looks like it's made from gemstones, like it's partially translucent. Maybe I need to go study fish or frogs or something. Anyway, I'm nowhere near achieving that kind of effect yet, but I think I'm starting to practice some little tricks here and there, like using red, hot, and orange for the shadows of the nose, so that it looks like the light's penetrating the skin and, glowing from all the blood vessels. I also added a bit of an orange glow at the bottom left of the frame, from some unknown light source. The shadow side of the face was starting to feel just a little bit blue and lifeless, and I found that this livened things up a little bit. In addition to shifts in color temperature, I find shifts in saturation really fascinating. Like, I think skin kind of looks really nice if you have a lower saturation near the shadow terminator, but then an increase in saturation as you go into the shadow. Now I'm starting to give the hair some attention. So hair is a bit of a struggle for me because I think my line work just isn't very good. You can see I'm constantly editing my curves. I'm just not really yet able to design very beautiful curves. So in this part, I made pretty liberal use of the liquify tool. This is basically just randomization and cherry picking, like throwing a box of pencils onto the ground until you find a pleasing arrangement. Anyway, hair eludes me a bit, but I do try to keep a few key learnings in mind. One is that hair is more ribbon-like than it is noodle-like. Unfortunately, I think ribbons are also quite a bit harder to draw than noodles, so there's that. Another is that clumps of ribbons of hair will usually weave over and under itself. For this, I don't really reason about it consciously, as I don't really have enough mental compute to handle the complexity of hair. So what I'll do is just start adding random shadow shapes and evolve them, and usually at some point there will be enough content on the canvas that any over and under opportunities will start revealing themselves, and then from there I can start refining them. I think this is how I tackle a lot of things that I haven't yet fully understood. Basically just slap down some material and then see what vaguely starts to look like what I'm going for, and then just keep trying to refine that. Another thing I learned recently is that hair is highly specular. I didn't really practice this very well here, but at the end, close to the end, I started adding some sharp specular highlights to individual strands of hair. Something I discovered while doing that was that having a very desaturated specular highlight, meaning pretty close to white, um, surrounded by a pretty highly saturated glow, and usually in here I'm using like pink or cyan. That looked really nice. So I guess maybe hair also exhibits a bit of subsurface scattering since, yeah, like under sunlight, hair will usually take on a strong saturated color. This is something I probably want to do some study and research on later. I think one of the more effective things that I'm doing with the hair here is to add the cast shadows of the hair onto itself. Principles of light and shadow are still relatively new for me, and I'm not yet at the stage where I've internalized it. But I have found that whenever I do consciously plot a cast shadow, it always uplifts the realism quite a bit more than I'd expect. Often I'll find myself looking at the piece thinking, it looks kind of hokey and flat, and that what was missing was a cast shadow somewhere. As for the color choices of the shadows, I don't think I did a very effective job. I really wasn't thinking about it at all. I was just kind of randomly alternating between deep cherry red and deep blue. Generally, I believe that color accuracy is the least important accuracy to go for, but it would still be nice to have at least a basic understanding of what color the shadows should be. Like if we're looking at the shadow side of this purple hair, then what color should that be? Intuition tells me it should lean more red than blue, but I don't know why. And what about the shadow that is cast onto the skin by the hair? I don't know what color that should lean. And what about the shadow that is cast from the hair to itself? Also not quite sure. Now I've started adding in a bit more highlights to the hair. I thought it would be nice to have slightly more turquoise colored highlights lower in the picture. I don't really know why. I guess I made the hair there a bit more blue, and assuming that the light source is yellow, the highlight could look a bit turquoise. But again, that's just totally naive speculation. I'm sure in reality the physics are quite a bit more complicated. But if I'm honest, I just really like the color teal and turquoise, and will always find an opportunity to use them somewhere for my personal enjoyment. Just a bit earlier, I changed the hair that was originally hanging over her right shoulder to now instead fall behind it, um, to match the original image more closely. I have some kind of mildly pedantic proclivity to mirroring the original reference rather than just using it as an inspiration for my own concept of the character. Maybe this is because I've spent most of my art journey copying from reference. Maybe I think it's also because I find it intellectually entertaining when an image is structurally or semantically the same as the original, but different in all other aspects. Like all the parts that don't actually exist except as human concepts, such as whether this object is front or behind the other. Those are kept the same, but everything that's actually concrete and tangible has been recontextualized. But I think I'm just pontificating a little bit now. Anyway, so afterwards I was looking at some other fan art of this character, who, by the way, is Abigail from Stardew Valley. And one aspect of her design that I never quite liked was her hair. It kind of looks a bit like tentacles or fiddlehead ferns. I will admit that over the course of the painting and staring at the image for so long, it did start growing on me a little bit, and now I find it quite charming. But yeah, at the start, I definitely did not want to paint the hair like that. But as I was saying, I was looking at some other fan art to see how other artists chose to do the hair. And one thing I realized was that I didn't really preserve her big, long bangs, and I think it would have been quite fun to keep that aspect of it. But I did see this one piece that I really liked by a person who goes by Malia Doodles, where she had actually kept those big spiraling fiddleheads, and in fact made them even bigger and more prominent. It kind of looks similar to Melia's hair, Melia from Xenoblade Chronicles, and I really liked this idea of emphasizing something that's maybe unattractive or at least not conventionally attractive, and purposely drawing attention to it rather than hiding or changing it. I did end up creating just a little bit of a spiral in the hair near the bottom right as a nod to that. Just finishing up the picture now, or getting ready to abandon it. Truth be told, I did start to get a little bit tired of it towards the end. It's not the most exciting picture in the world. As you can see, a lot of the right side of the picture is still quite unfinished. The clothes and the hair are quite unrefined. What's likely is that in a few years I'll probably be going through some of my older pictures and then try to finish them off or improve upon them using any new learnings and skills I might have developed in the interim. This is maybe the 6th or 7th picture I've done that's mostly without reference ever since deciding to learn to draw from imagination, and I'm pretty pleased with how it's turned out. I do think that it lacks ambition. I did try a more ambitious painting of a different character from Stardew Valley right before this, Emily. I wanted to do the dance scene, but quickly found that I was a bit out of my depth, so sticking to more familiar territory for now. Just take it one lesson at a time, I guess. I made this video as a kind of diary entry to myself so that I can come back in a few years' time and cringe